once you see things as they are, you recognize that, okay, my true nature, the natural state has wisdom, right? So if I can understand that wisdom and then bring it into play in relationship to the mental state that's occurring all the time, and learn how to train the mind and calm the mind down, then the mind will start sending different signals to the body, and the autonomic nervous system can start to balance out, right? And you can start to experience being happy and enjoying your life. But one of the things that I think is really critical in this process is to understand that the voice in your head, most people take the voice in their head to be them thinking, right? If that's the case, you're going to be stuck in that programming, right? So one of the things that you have to do is recognize that this voice in your head is not you thinking, and you can look at it and see that that's true, because a lot of the thoughts that that voice produces are negative thoughts about you.
According to your understanding and teachings, is there a difference between, or the ground of being, self-realization, and enlightenment?
Round of being, realization, and enlightenment. Well, the first distinction that I think is important to make is, and this is really what got me involved in non-duality. And at this point, I'm really working on developing a non-dual approach to doing psychotherapy, and I think
Mm.
this approach is going to become the future thing in terms of psychotherapy. And the most important distinction that I think that we can make is to recognize that the personality is not our true identity. And most of conventional psychology and psychotherapy deals with working with the personality and helping the personality change and resolving trauma and all the other things that go along with being a healthy personality. The problem with that I came to recognize over the years is that, first of all, the personality is inherently unstable. The personality is inherently vulnerable. It's always changing. And so even if there are changes that are made in the way somebody thinks and some way somebody behaves, it usually doesn't hold up. They usually end up back in trouble sooner or later. And this was very frustrating to me as a psychologist. I just felt that there was something that was in the way of making the kind of difference that I wanted to make with people. And then through my own work and through my own kind of waking up to the truth of my identity, it became evident to me that the personality is the problem. The personality is in the way of the reality of who we actually are. It's a condition limited version in form of what we actually are. And what we actually are is the awareness that's never not here. It's always here, but most of us pay attention to the thought process and the mental activity, which is the home of the personality. And we identify with our thoughts, we identify with the way we see things from our conditioning as a personality. And so, what I learned was that if I work with people and help them to see that the personality that they've taken themselves to be is not actually real, it's a concept, it's a self concept, it's a self image. And when we identify with that, and when we identify with being a physical body, right, we're taking ourselves to be a form that awareness is in, and we take that to be separate from awareness, and we take that to be who we actually are, and we try and live our life from there. And that's just impossible. It can never work because the personality actually doesn't really exist. And if it doesn't exist, it can never possibly be happy. It can never possibly experience what it's attempting to experience, which is peace, satisfaction, well being, and happiness. Now, people are pursuing that. We're in the pursuit of happiness our entire lives. But if you wake up and see that you're not actually the personality, and you start to learn to look from awareness, And when you learn to look from awareness, you can see the personality and the personality's behavior, and you can see the distortions that are occurring there, and you can see that the view from the personality is dysfunctional. And if you're seeing that from awareness, if you've come to recognize yourself as the awareness and learn to look from there, all right, then what you see is different. You see the personality, and what you see, you don't have to be. If you can see it, you don't have to be it. And if you can see it from the space and from the freedom of your true nature as awareness, the natural state, then you can make changes in the personality, but you know that that's not actually what you are. It's just the form that you take to be in the world.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of think of, if I would explain this to a kid, I would say, look at the your favorite actor, and he's played 10 roles that you've seen, but the actor
Mhm.
is, and the actor who he is not any of those 10 roles. So that's the
Mhm.
personalities that you have to be able to step back from and say, I'm just inhabiting this for a short period of time. Because I mean, Jung talked about personas and the need to have play different roles, but you're taking a step further back and saying, yeah, but you're not the person, you are not those roles, right?
That's right.
Right.
And that's a good metaphor to use about the actor playing different characters and different scripts and so forth. And the thing that makes acting fun for people who do that for a living is they know all the time that it's not real.
Right.
They know all the time, even when I'm in character, I know I'm in character, and I can enjoy the experience of being this character. But at the end of the day, I go back, to my ordinary experience of my identity.
Right. So we need to figure out who is this, who is this, the awareness of who we are. Like, that's what we need to figure out as people now, since our personality or our egos are not our real self, like the actors' roles. Right. So that's what I'm hoping we're going to uncover here and solve the mystery in an hour. What do you think?
Well, well, the thing about it, Mark, that's interesting to me is that, and this is what I try and get across to my students in my
Yeah.
meditation classes, is that figuring out will never go anywhere
Yeah.
because that's just using the same process of thinking that got us in trouble in the first place, right? So you don't have to figure out who you are because you're experiencing being it all the time, right?
Mm.
And you can never see it, right? You can, because you're looking from it, so you can never see it, right? But since you're being it, all you have to do is allow yourself to notice that you're experiencing being aware. You're experiencing your existence. You're experiencing being alive. That's your true nature. Right? And you don't have to figure anything out. All you have to do is relax the mind, right? And pay attention to the screen the movie's playing on. Pay attention to that which is always here, that never changes, that has no form, right? Right? But is what's behind the personality giving it life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You had described an early experience of profound fulfillment and clarity, that you once understood as enlightenment, but came to later see it differently. What was that uh, initial understanding of enlightenment that you had, and what shifted your understanding between that and what you later found it to be?
Well, my initial experience of enlightenment goes back to my early days, my youth, when I was experimenting with LSD. I was reading Alan Watts books, Krishnamurti books, Yogananda books, hanging out in Kundalini retreats and so
Right.
forth. And what happened was I had this what I now call a glimpse. I had this temporary clarity or this temporary experience of the where the filtering of the mind kind of relaxed, and I could have a direct experience of my true nature as consciousness or awareness. And so I did what I think a lot of people do, and they say, "Oh, that's what I really am, and I'm not the personality, I'm not the body, and as long as I reside there, as long as I live my life there, everything will be fine." And I did experience a kind of high. I did some meditation retreats, Vipassana meditation retreats, Zen meditation retreats, And they facilitated kind of maintaining this high, which was nice. It felt good, right? But then I then something happened, and what happened was unexpected. And what happened was I had this very, very intense anxiety attack.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, how the hell can this happen if I'm awake and I know my true nature is consciousness? Where is this coming from? What is this? Why is this? Right. And it took me a while to see clearly what was going on. And what was going on was I was denying my personality and my conditioning and my physical body as if they didn't matter. And so I just kept pushing them aside and just tried to stay aware of myself as the awareness, right? But what happened was the body came back and said, "Oh, no, you're not going to ignore me. I'll present you with such intense anxiety that you have to pay attention to me." And then I realized what my mistake was. My mistake was to take the awareness to be my true nature and the personality not to be real and not to be my nature and the body not to be real and not to be my nature. But that's just flipping the script. It's just seeing things the opposite way that I was seeing them before, right? And it's still denying half of the reality of my existence because the personality, and this is what I saw, the personality is the awareness. The
Mm.
awareness, consciousness and awareness is the unified field. It is everything. It is what is everything, right? And so the personality is awareness that has manifested itself in a form for a limited period of time and separated itself from its source so it could experience a human life, right?
Right.
And the body is the transportation for that personality during this temporary life, right? Once I saw that and I stopped resisting being the personality, and kind of started loving the personality, and started to recognize that, oh, what really works here is to understand the wisdom of my true nature and have that wisdom begin to get expressed by the personality. So in other words, to bring the personality into alignment with my true nature,
Mm.
right? So that the conditioning got replaced, with more functional ways of being in the world, being able to relax and enjoy being alive and to understand the source of my well-being and happiness was the existence of my awareness itself. That's very important to understand because most of us are living a life in which we're dependent on the right circumstances to be happy. I mean, if you really look at that, that's why money is such a big deal for people because they see it as a way to buy the toys or to create the situations that will allow you to be happy. It doesn't work. I mean, you can look at the richest people on the planet, right? And the most powerful people on the planet, like the guy that's leading this country right now. And if you look at his face and listen to him talk, this is not a happy person, okay? So obviously, the money and the fame and the power didn't get the job done. And I feel a lot of compassion for him.
Yeah. I can see how you're saying that without kind of this um, discovering your own awareness of who you are, the problems keep coming back because if you just intellectually say, I am not my habit, I am not the, the gambler, the drug user, or the bad kid, those are just behaviors, those are the ego, and I can change that. Intellectual understanding doesn't change anything because it's still of the mind, right? I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
still of what we're creating here in this material world, whereas the consciousness is so much bigger than that.
Yeah.
You need something to ground it, I think.
Yeah. And it's not just your mind, but the conditioning is the programming that's playing in your mind. In other words, it's the source of the thoughts that are occurring all the time. And it lives in your nervous system as well, it lives in the body, right? So you can't just ignore that and think it's going to be different because you're ignoring it. You can get high in terms of being experiencing yourself as consciousness and awareness, but that's not going to change your nervous system. It's not going to change what's happening in your mind unless you start to pay attention to that and treat it like a child that has to learn how to be civil, learn how to love, learn how to be compassionate. You know, once you see things as they are, you recognize that, okay, my true nature, the natural state has wisdom, right? So if I can understand that wisdom and then bring it into play in relationship to the mental state that's occurring all the time, and learn how to train the mind and calm the mind down, then the mind will start sending different signals to the body, and the autonomic nervous system can start to balance out, right? And you can start to experience being happy and enjoying your life. But one of the things that I think is really critical in this process is to understand that the voice in your head, most people take the voice in their head to be them thinking, right? If that's the case, you're going to be stuck in that programming, right? So one of the things that you have to do is recognize that this voice in your head is not you thinking, and you can look at it and see that that's true, because a lot of the thoughts that that voice produces are negative thoughts about you. So if that's you thinking, you're pretty crazy, right?
Yeah.
And not only that, when you want to go to sleep at night, you can't just turn that voice off, you know? And as you're living your life, it's constantly interpreting everything to you. But the way it's interpreting everything to you is if you're a separate self, and everything has the potential to be a threat to you.
Mm.
And so that's what the voice is always saying, always looking to see, is there something in my environment that's going to threaten me? Is this person somebody I can trust? And I have to organize my life in such a way where I can feel safe and secure. And that leaves us being neurotic and paranoid.
You spent over 30 years as a prison warden, correct? I think we mentioned that in the beginning, and that's an environment that's defined by control and fear and violence. But you worked with these people and you gained a lot of experience and helped shape your understanding of freedom. And how does working in that kind of an environment as a therapist, and especially as a non-dual therapist, shape the teaching and the practice differently than being at a retreat, like a 10-day Vipassana retreat or a non-duality retreat?
Well, first of all, I wasn't a prison warden for 32 years. I was a
Mm.
prison warden for the last part of my career, which was about 5 years.
Mhm.
In the beginning, I was a clinical psychologist in a maximum security prison. And then I moved on to become the director of psychology. And then I moved into an administrative position. I was in charge of the protective custody unit for that prison. And then over the years, I gradually moved up until I was promoted to a medium security prison with about 1,000 inmates, and I was in charge of that. But it all started when I first went to work in the maximum security prison, and I started to interact with these inmates. And it, I guess it was my own naivete or innocence, but I didn't feel afraid of them.
Mm.
I just had a natural connection with them as human beings, and I saw them as being ordinary human beings, right? That were taken over by their mental states in terms of antisocial behaviors or sociopathic behaviors. And in every case, I could look in the file and see that their conditioning was the source of the personality being, a criminal personality. There was a lot of very intense abuse and neglect in their childhood and so forth. So when I started working in the prison system around 1973, I went to New York and did the S training. For people who aren't as old as I am, and maybe you are, they may not know what the S training was, but it was a really radical, large group consciousness training that was developed by this guy, Werner Erhard. And when I went there and I did this training, it was a very intense 60-hour training, right? And it was based on some Zen teaching. Werner Erhard lived with Alan Watts on a houseboat out in San Francisco, and I think he got a lot of the ideas for the S training from his relationship with Alan Watts. And it really made an impact on me when I did that. And the first thing I thought about was, wow, what it would be like to do this with these guys in the maximum security prison, right? That don't have an opportunity to have access to this transformational experience. So what I did is I asked Werner Erhard for permission to do the S training in the prison. And he said, yeah, I give you my permission, but I'm not going to give you the actual training manual or anything like that. So what I did is I went to New York and I sat in on trainings and assisted in trainings and was memorizing the training by doing that. And then I went back to the prison and asked for permission to do a version of it in the prison. And I was told that there wasn't any space available to do it other than uh, the uh, the outbuilding there. That was the building where the electric chair was, where they would send inmates for the last month before they'd be executed. And this was a separate compound. And they said you could use that if you want to use that. So I said, okay. And so I interviewed about 20 inmates, and I intentionally mixed the population up. I put guys that were from the mafia in the same group with guys that were from the Black Muslims, and then regular criminal guys. I put lifers in there with other people that were serving short kinds of time. I mixed it up. I was really crazy for doing that, but I mixed it up. And then they told me, the administration told me, we don't have the staff to put guards in there with you. So you can go in there with the inmates and we'll lock you in and then we'll let you out after the training. So you're on your own, right? So I went in there like that and did the S training, basically the S training. I called it the Impact Project. And I was using material from the S training. And I did a lot of very intense, radical things with these guys that were really blowing their minds in terms of learning about how their mind works, learning to understand their true nature, learning to understand about their conditioning, and so forth and so on. And an example that demonstrated the power of this type of experience was there was one guy there. His name, they called him Chemo. And they called him Chemo because he had been in college as a chemistry major before he became a biker. Then he became the president of the Pagans, the biking gang, and he ended up killing another guy, and he was in prison doing life plus. And he came. I had him in the training, and the training totally transformed him. And after he did this training, his behavior changed dramatically. You know, he became a model inmate. They eventually transferred him out to a minimum security facility. And many years later, after I had done all this, I was working as an associate administrator at a youth correctional facility. And this guy walked in my office with a suit on. I didn't recognize him. And he came behind my desk and hugged me. And he said, I want to thank you for saving my life. And it was Chemo.
Wow.
And he had been released from prison after serving, I don't know, 25 years. And the Department of Correction hired him to be a gang intervention specialist. And now he had a state car, he had a title, he had a good salary, he had good benefits, he had gotten married, and he was living a normal life. So that shows what's possible. This guy coming out of prison and turning into a productive person who was making a difference with other human beings. And there's a lot of stories like that of guys that I worked with in prison. So it really showed me what the possibility was. And then many years later, when I did become, because what happened was the administrator of the prison sent me a message and said, after I did this 3 times, he sent me a message and said, we don't want you to do this anymore because we don't like what we're seeing. The inmates, after they do this training with you, seem to be very quiet, and we think they may be planning something. So so he told me you can't do it anymore. And so that's when I decided, well, I guess I have to become an administrator. So it took me 12 years to get my own prison. But once I got my own prison, I went back inside and started doing the training again. Now, I had gone over to Philadelphia and was learning about the new version of the S training, which is called the Forum. And I invited some of the leaders that were leading that training to come into the prison and meet with the inmates. And I put together a new version of the Impact Project and started doing it in that prison. So that was what I did prior to leaving that career.
Wow. I mean, talk about a win. That's huge. A gang member who killed someone who's in life plus is released after 25 years and is the works for intervention, toward
Mhm.
intervention.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. What is it, or in your own experience, what is it that changed in how you saw the world or yourself?
Well, what changed is, once you have an insight into your true nature, you recognize that, first of all, it's not personal. And secondly, that it is the exact same awareness that everybody else is experiencing, right? So what happens is, like, they asked at one point, I think they asked Krishnamurti, well, how about other people? How do you deal with other people? And he said, there are no other people.
Right.
And so what happens is you realize that everybody that you're dealing with in your life is you, that the awareness is the same awareness that you are, right? And when you become aware of that, then you realize that you no longer want to be in conflict with people. You
Mm.
want to find ways to live peacefully with people and live in harmony and express the love that is your true nature. So what happens is, and this is where meditation comes in, because meditation is a practice where you're moving your attention away from the mental activity and becoming aware of the body breathing, using the breath to focus on the body breathing. And when your attention is away from the mental activity, you're away from your personality and you're experiencing the awareness, which is your true nature, being aware of the body. Okay. So by practicing this consistently, right, it starts to eliminate the process, the mental process, as being the governor of your behavior. It starts to have the thought processes that are reactive and negative and not useful start to die down, start to relax, and start to get replaced by new neural networks. We're using neuroplasticity to retrain the way the brain was processing information. And the way that that starts to change, the way that it changed for me, the first thing was that I began to notice that I was still experiencing anger, but when I experienced it, I didn't have to act it out anymore. I didn't have to speak it, and I didn't have to act it out anymore. And right away, that changed the fact that I was no longer getting into trouble with other people by being angry and acting out. And then by continuing to practice meditation, and then to add to the formal practice of meditation an informal practice, which is what I call resting as awareness for brief moments as often as possible during the day, right? You start to get to a critical mass where there's more of your true nature than there is of your mental state. And then your mental state starts to rapidly change, and that's when I noticed that anger itself was diminishing. I wasn't experiencing being angry at all, right? Being angry at all. And then the next thing was fear, right? The fear was still there, but it wasn't stopping me as much as it used to stop me, right? So it's a gradual process of reconditioning the mind and the brain, right? Out of experiencing yourself as the natural state or the awareness and being able to see from there. And when you're seeing from there, you can see the mind instead of be in the mind or act as the mind.
Mm. So it seems like, at least the way I'm hearing it, is like there starts to be a buffer between the emotion of anger or fear, right? The feelings, and your reaction or not reaction. So that buffer gets wider and wider where you recognize that you're angry before you just shout out at somebody, or you recognize that there's some fear coming up before you start, fight, flight, or freeze. And
Mm-hmm.
and through more of this, you call it resting as awareness and the meditation, that buffer gets wider and wider and wider, and just those negative things just dissipate.
Yeah, gradually in time they dissipate and you
Wow.
start getting access to the real source of happiness and peace and well-being. So that instead of depending on the circumstances being right, no matter what the circumstances are, you always have access to the source of awareness, which is never affected by circumstances.
Mm.
The way I describe it is that our true nature, the natural state awareness, is like the space in the room that we're sitting in. It's not affected by anything that happens in the room. And awareness is like that. It doesn't resist anything. It allows everything to be exactly the way it is. And so there's no suffering, because suffering, the source of suffering, is to be in the world and expect what's happening in the world to be the way you want it to be instead of the way it is.
Yeah.
To want things to be different than they are so they don't bother you, right? But the only problem with that is you don't have any control over what's happening in the world. And furthermore, you don't even have any control over what's happening in your mind based on your conditioning and your personality. So that can't ever produce happiness and well-being, right? But once you start to experience your true nature, there's just this natural state of happiness. It's a spontaneous state of happiness. So that's one of the other things that happened as time passed, is when I noticed that I was feeling happy and peaceful, and it wasn't coming from the circumstances. It was just coming from my state of being, right? And there's this statement that they make in a lot of the Eastern teachings, Sat Chit Ananda,
Yep.
right? Um, and the interpretation of that is existence, consciousness, happiness, right? And that's a description of the source of well-being, when the source of well-being is awareness itself, is that you're experiencing being happy simply because you exist. That becomes the source of your happiness and well-being and peace.
Mm. And I guess that's where the space is for love to reign superior, right? And the open heart toward all things,
Mhm.
that we hear about so much in spiritual traditions. It's hard to be genuinely loving and kind if you're not feeling that way within yourself.
Yeah, well, when you're experiencing the natural state, you experience that you are love.
Mm,
So you're not trying to love, you're just expressing yourself. You are
mm,
love. And when you're, because the awareness that you are has an affinity with everything, because everything is what it is. Everything is awareness. So how could it not love itself? Everything is itself, right? And so when you're experiencing that, you experience a natural state of love, and you see that the natural state of love is a state in which love is an experience of giving. It's not an experience of getting.
mm.
Right. So it's like the Beatles said, the love you get is equal to the love you give, right? And that's the experience. And you start to experience that, then you start to look at the relationships in your life and realize it's in giving your love to the people around you that you experience love.
Mm. Yeah, I think in what maybe it's the first noble truth of Buddhists that life is suffering, so we need to overcome suffering, and it seems like the suffering is because of our personality's attachment to trying to find happiness outside ourselves, to our job, to our position, to our titles, to our relationships, to the
Mhm.
outcomes of an event.
Yeah.
And so becoming more aware of your awareness releases that attachment.
Well, if you're fulfilled, the awareness that is our true nature doesn't need anything and doesn't want anything,
Hmm.
right? But the condition that we're in, and what the Buddha meant by life is suffering, is a condition that we find ourselves in which he said, what is the source of the suffering? He called it desire. Well,
Mm,
what does that
desires.
mean? It means that you want things to be different than they are. That's what
Right.
you desire. You're always, I mean, if you watch your mental activity, no matter what you get that you think will make you happy, it's not long before you desire something else because that stopped working, right? And that's a never ending chase. That's a never ending pursuit of happiness. It's in the Constitution that we're guaranteed the right to pursue happiness. Well, that must be because most people recognize they're not happy, so they want to make sure they have the right to pursue it.
Right. But they don't tell us how to pursue it innately, you know.
No, they don't tell us how to pursue it, but with modern technology, the television tells us how to pursue it.
Oh, they
It
sure
shows
sure
us,
does.
it shows us all the time what would make us happy. I mean, if you look at the language that's in these commercials, it's pointed right at this is going to make you happy. This is going to make you excited. This is going to make your life work. Get this, eat this, do this. And a lot of these medications that they're pushing now,
Yeah.
especially in the evening news when the seniors are watching, all these medications that they're pushing now, at the end of the commercial, when they start talking about all the negative side effects, that includes sudden death,
Right, right,
right? And while they're saying that and they start talking faster, they're showing you pictures of beautiful, beautiful pictures of people being happy and playing.
right.
So so showing there's something visually that's keeping your attention on something positive while they're saying something
In the
negative
negative.
that they have to say by law.
I crack up when they say, and don't take XYZ drug if you're allergic to it. Who would possibly know they're allergic to it unless they've tasted it or tested for it?
That's right. That's
You
right.
know,
That's
it
right.
may cause death.
That's
Um,
that's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy.
you were talking about how our original state is one of happiness and innate joy, etc. And I remember when my kids were born, they're about 6 years apart, but both of them had an innate happiness. They were always smiling and joyful until, middle school at some point.
If you look at a baby, before a baby has language, Heidegger said language is the house of being.
Mm,
So before a baby has language and they don't have a name, and that they're a very right after they're born, they don't even know their body, that they're their body, right? If you look at an infant around that time and look at their eyes are expressing wonder. Their eyes are expressing absolute excitement and wonder all the time, right? And then they get a name and they're told they're their body, and that starts to close down. But even when it starts to close down, I remember when I was a young kid, and I'm sure everybody can remember this. You get up in the morning and all you wanted to do was play,
yeah.
and life was fun. You were having fun all the time, right? Yeah, and now one of the Zen masters said, if it's not fun, it's better left undone. And
I like it.
when I first heard that, I thought, well, then there's a lot of things I guess I'm not going to be doing. No, that's not what he meant. He meant, why aren't you always having fun? Like you did when you were a kid. You were always having fun. And then things started to get serious, and you started to feel the competition, and you started to realize you weren't the most attractive kid in the class, or you didn't have the best clothes in the class, and you couldn't get the best girlfriend in the class. And then you started to get quiet, and then you started to be invisible, so you didn't have to suffer. And that's what happens to all of us, right? But it's not the end of the story, because we all have the capacity to wake up to our true nature. Unfortunately, most human beings in the condition that we're living in the world right now, unfortunately, most human beings will die without recognizing and experiencing the truth of who they are.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but it's available. I mean, meditation is one of the ways it's available. So what I think has to happen for people, and I know this was true for me, you have to come to realize that the personality is the source of your suffering instead of the world, instead of other people. You have to come to realize that, and you have to come to see that the only benefit, the only thing that's worthwhile out of being a personality is to recognize its failure.
Hmm.
And if you recognize its failure, then you're going to be looking to see, okay, what else is there? That's what happened with the Buddha when he came out of the palace and saw people that were dead and suffering. And he asked his assistant, is this going to happen to me? And the assistant said, yes. And he said, well, I want to find out if there's any other possibility than this.
Yeah.
Do I have to die? One of the things that once you established as an ego or as a personality, you have to begin to deny your mortality. You have to begin to deny it, because if you were to live in the fear of death every day, you wouldn't be able to function. So you
Right.
have to pretend that you're not going to die. And that's unfortunate, because as the Buddha said, old age, sickness, and death are going to happen to all of us. So you can pretend as long as you want, but sooner or later, that's something's going to happen, and the personality is going to be insufficient to deal with it, and then you're going to be traumatized.
You had said, I think, if I'm quoting it correctly from one of your talks, that awakening is easy, but integration is difficult. Is uh, and you can correct the statement, but is awakening that easy of a process? I mean, I know there's instant enlightenment for some people, like Ramana Maharshi, for example, but there's also this kind of lengthy period, and some people never get enlightened meditating for decades upon decades. But there's always the next life, the Zen master says. Don't worry.
Mm.
Can everybody come to know their awareness and their true nature from your experience?
Yeah, my experience is that coming to know your true nature is not a process. It's already true. It's already the case.
Because it's
Yeah.
there all the time, right?
It's there all the time. All it involves is simply looking and noticing, and noticing what is the most fundamental aspect of your existence, and it is awareness itself. Right? It's
Mm.
awareness itself. That's not hard. And once you recognize that, right, then you just look to see this awareness. And if you look to see this awareness, Muji, who was
Yep.
a non-dual teacher, he does a process called the invitation, right? And what he does in this process is he walks people through a process where he asks you questions about the awareness. He asks you to look at the awareness, right? It's right here, right now, where you are, right? To look at it. It has no form, it has no shape, but it's there all the time, right? And he asks questions like, is it a male or a female, right? Uh, does it need anything? Does it want anything? Is it suffering? Is it thinking? Did it come from anywhere? Is it going anywhere? And you just keep looking at your awareness and seeing and becoming familiar with your true nature. And then at the very end of that process, he says, how far away from you is this awareness? And the answer, if you look, is there is no distance. In other words, it's me. It's what I am.
Right.
So it's not one of the mistakes that people make is they think that you have to go through some process, and some people think it's got to be this very difficult process in order to wake up and discover your true nature. And I say that's wrong. That's not hard at all. It is more difficult once you've had the insight into your true nature, right? To go through the process of dealing with your mind and you keep falling back into the identity, the personality, and behaving poorly, and suffering the consequences of that. And then people say, well, I had it but I lost it.
Right.
What do I have to do to keep it instead of losing it? And the answer to that is you never lost it. You just stopped paying attention to it and
Mm.
started paying attention to your feelings and your thinking and your conditioning. That's all. You can't lose it. You can't lose your true nature. It's impossible to lose your true nature.
Right. But the mind is I don't know if it's created for that reason, but the mind is there to think and to process, right? So, and if the awareness is there, it's there to be aware of this computer and video I'm looking at, the pen I'm holding, aware of what you're saying, right? So all the five senses create this awareness within us.
Yeah, the awareness is what's seeing what your eyes are looking at.
Yeah, that's good. So when in meditation, we can get well, it took me more than a decade to get to a point of what I call no mind or just silence. And it doesn't stay very long, but, a few minutes at a time, and I feel successful. Until that song that you can't get out of your head from the 70s pops back in, just a little clip of it. And you're like, where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to work at letting that go again. When you're sitting in meditation in a space of awareness and you're not seeing, hearing, thinking anything, and then a thought pops in, or a song, or a vision, or a conversation, what was it that triggers that?
Well, the reason that happens is it's like a compulsion, and the reason it's like a compulsion is because you have habitually practiced identifying with your thoughts over and over again in all kinds of situations for years and years and years, and that has produced a brain that has programming playing in it, neural patterns that playing in the brain that come from all your past experiences and your conditioning, right? So it's what they call in brain science the default state.
Mm,
So you keep falling back into it, especially when you're under threat, right? And the amygdala in the brain goes off, right?
mhm,
And they call it an amygdala hijack. When that goes off, it pulls your attention in because the system has to have your full attention because the system is is interpreting what's going on to be a threat to you, a threat to your personality, a threat to your body, a threat to your life. So that's very compelling, right? So it's just a habit to pay attention. That's why when you sit in meditation, a thought comes up, and because of how many times you practice it and what a habit it is, your attention automatically follows the thought, right? But once you practice being aware, you can catch that. As soon as you catch it, you can move your attention back away from it, being aware of the body breathing. So, one of the things that you're practicing in meditation is being aware of your attention and understanding that you can determine where it's pointed,
Mm,
right? So
mhm,
whenever you're upset, if you move your attention, especially when the upset has no basis, right? You're just being neurotic and crazy, which is most of the time. Yeah. You move your attention away from that and put it on something neutral that's not psychological, right?
mhm,
And so you're depriving the program of having reality, because when you give it attention, that's energizing the programming, and that's telling the programming that it's accurate and realistic. When you take your attention away from it, it will naturally start to dissipate and lose its validity and reality because of the fact that you removed your attention from it.
mm. Do you feel that in your experience with your students and the prisoners and so forth, is there a time window based on age? You know, because I've been thinking twice as long as my son, three times as long as my daughter, you know, roughly, that that they can get rid of that in meditation, their thoughts bumping, you know, 50% quicker than I can because I've got double the years of practice thinking and into that state? Or is that irrelevant? It's just how good are you at returning to the breath?
I think the thing that's the most important factor is how committed you are to paying attention, how committed
Mm,
you are to being awake, how committed you are to transforming yourself.
hmm
And that commitment will express itself in how often you meditate. It'll express itself in whether you go to retreats. It'll express itself in your commitment to continue to learn and find teachers that can help to expand your understanding of what's going on and so forth. I think that's the biggest thing. It is the truth that as you get older, you crystallize. People crystallize. They're so in that sense, it can be more difficult. But if the commitment is strong enough and you're able to maintain an awake state and stay aware of awareness consistently, right, out of the commitment and out of the way that you're behaving in relationship to that commitment, that at some point when you have an awakened experience, you realize that not only are you experiencing your awareness now, but it has always been what you are,
mm,
right? So the experience of what you are now becomes the experience of what you've always been. I mean, one of the things that Ramana Maharshi says consistently, he puts it very simply, right? You are the awareness. You are your true nature all the time. Even when you're in the form of a personality, you're your true nature. That is your true nature in a limited form that has separated itself temporarily from its source.
hmm
Right? But the simple reality of it is that you are always who you really are, even when you're in the form of the personality. So if you know you're in the form of the personality, that can be sourced from the wisdom of your true nature, right? And it can gradually be reshaped and reoriented in such a way that you're able to experience a natural state of well-being and behave in a way that it's expressing harmony.
mm. So after this awakening, I mean, you still need a personality to exist in this world because you have to interact with people.
Yeah.
So I guess what it's doing is really kind of like erasing the slate and forming a new clear, like washing the dishes. Now the plates are clear and you've got clean dinnerware to eat from, you know, or to think from, so to speak. So
Mhm.
you're still the same fun guy, or you know, you love to talk, but the focus of all of that is I don't know, more kind, more loving, more genuine, and less
Uh, you,
reactive.
you, there's no way you can be in the world without being the personality.
Right,
I mean, if you imagine being your awareness in the world, you would have to go to a mental institution.
right,
Yeah, because how could you be your awareness? You have no form. You're not related to anything. You live outside of time. Okay,
right.
so you have to be the personality. And what happens is you begin to deal with the way the personality is presenting itself in your mind in all the circumstances that you encounter, and you're noticing whether or not the way you're relating to the circumstance is going to produce suffering or not, or the way you're relating to the circumstances is
Mm,
realistic or not, or whether it's consistent with your true nature. All right. So a little bit of the time, every day as you live your life, you're paying attention in such a way where you can start to come out of the what I call a hypnotic state. You start to come out of the hypnotic state of your personality, and you start to recognize your personality as a mirage, as an appearance, not
mm,
something that's actually alive. That's so important to understand, that your personality is not actually alive. And as long as you think you're that personality, you can never be happy. It's
mm,
impossible, because something that doesn't exist cannot experience happiness.
mm. Yeah, it makes sense. Think of it that way. Hmm. I tend to think when I started thinking about my inability to get a song out of my head or stop the argument with somebody in the head, that we don't have free will. Because if I don't have the free will to stop my thought or choose my thoughts, how can there possibly be free will? But there is freedom of choice, right? Like I can choose this pen, black pen over a blue pen. But of course, now that everyone is saying, well, no, that's all based on your previous experiences and blah, 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 and what pens you had to use in school. So it's actually not free will because you're programmed by it.
Mm-hmm.
When you come in touch with your natural state of awareness and you're aware of that awareness, do you find that there is or is not free will in this universe that we're in, this world that we're living in? How much control do we really have?
Well, what you find is that free will is an illusion, and there are a lot of scientists and quantum physicists
Right.
now that say that they can produce watertight arguments that free will is an illusion. Right?
Yeah.
What when people are worried about not having free will, they're worried about not having the ability to make choices that will allow them to improve or change or
Yeah.
transform. Okay, but if you look at it and you understand that when you recognize your true nature, when you have an insight into your true nature, then your identity is naturally changing, and that's your destiny. It's always your destiny to be what you actually are, right?
Mm,
And so from that view, now you begin to see the personality in a way where it naturally starts to readjust and realign and reorganize itself to be consistent with the source. And that whole thing was your destiny.
mm.
Right? So it's not, there's a way of understanding free will. It may take a little contemplation and a little deepening your understanding, but there's a way of understanding the idea of not having free will that has it not be problematic.
Right. Hmm. What is the dark night of the soul? I've heard you speak
Well,
about that.
well, that was the experience I spoke about earlier
Hmm.
when you have insight into your true nature and you reject your physical existence and you reject your personality, right? The dark night of the soul is when that comes back to claim its value, when that comes back to claim its significance.
Hmm.
And when I experienced that and had this experience of an anxiety attack, it was the most intense anxiety I ever experienced. I never imagined anxiety could be that uncomfortable. I mean, I literally was jumping out of my skin and couldn't do anything to control it. And then I also felt the sense of absolute desperation, because I was helpless. There was nothing I could do. I was helpless. Absolute desperation and absolute hopelessness. And after this calmed down, and after this passed, after I got back in touch with my personality and my body and everything, it became evident to me that I was actually experiencing the truth of what it would be like to consciously experience being the personality.
Hmm.
And that's the dark night of the soul. The consciously experience being the personality in such a way where you experienced your desperation. They talk about that idea people live in quiet desperation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not a quiet desperation. It's a very intense, anxious experience of desperation with a sense of helplessness that you can't get out of it and you can't stop it, right? And it's never going to allow you to be happy, right? And you're going to suffer the rest of your life like this. This is the kind of experience that I think drives people to suicide.
Mm.
Just wanting to escape. They feel they can't get out of it. They can't escape this, right? And this was the most intense experience of that I ever imagined having. And the only way I could understand it when I started to listen to descriptions of the dark night of the soul was that was exactly what it was for me.
I think I recently watched one of your talks on your YouTube channel, and we'll have the link in the show notes below for people. And you were talking maybe about this moment or a different one where you said you couldn't believe why you were so anxious and why it wouldn't go away, and then you took a week off or something to
Mm-hmm.
figure it out, and that what I think what you came up with was I'm being anxious about being anxious.
Yeah.
And it was that kept the anxiety going, was the anxiety about being anxious.
Yeah. That's what that was an insight for me in terms of understanding anxiety disorder.
Right.
Because what happens with anxiety disorder is something could happen in somebody's life that was a realistic reason to be anxious, something that's really threatening and caused them to be anxious, right? And when that happens, their autonomic nervous system goes way out of whack. The sympathetic side of it goes way out of whack. The fight, flight, or freeze comes up, and the rest and digest side goes down, right? And after that happens, right, what happens after that happens is this is what trauma is about. After that happens, it takes less things to stimulate that uh, fight, flight, or freeze experience. It takes less things for that to happen, right? So the whole system adjusts to become more sensitive, right? And then what happens is if you suffer from the anxiety, right, you be concerned about the anxiety, you want it to go away, you want it to stop, and you don't know what's causing it, right? So you keep paying attention to it, right? And when you keep paying attention to it, you start to get anxious, waiting to see if you're going to be anxious. And
Right.
then you start to get anxious, and then you become anxious because now you are anxious. And then you become more anxious because now you're more anxious, right? And starts to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It starts to become a circular process that keeps feeding itself. And the only way out of it is to be able to see it, right, instead of be it. That's why I say anything you can see, you don't have to be. Once I saw what was happening, right, then I wasn't identified with it. I wasn't participating with it anymore, and it just died down and died out.
Mm. Yeah. I know a lot of people. I had anxiety for a little bit in my life, not a lot. But I have friends who were anxious all the time, worried all the time, tests coming up, parents are going to be mad at them. What if they miss the bus? What's dad's going to be pissed? He's got to go pick them up or whatever, just even little things. And
Mm-hmm.
that is anxiety caused from fear. It's a fear of something which is causing the fear of the unknown of the result is what triggers anxiety,
It's a fear of life itself.
fear of life itself. So,
Yeah, because what happens is, I mean, the personality, the hallmark of a personality is that it's separate from everything else.
mm,
Once you're separate from the entire world, you
oh,
have a lot of threats that can hurt you, right?
right.
And so your system, your mental system, the primary function of your mental system is to have you survive, not just as a body, but as a personality, right? And the way the personality survives is to look good, to avoid looking bad, to dominate and avoid domination, right? To escape from anything that's uncomfortable and try and maintain comfort, right? And so that becomes a full-time job. That's using all your energy.
Hmm. And for somebody who is suffering from anxiety, a lot of people go on these, heavy duty drugs for anxiety to change their brain chemistry. And there's all kinds of problems with that I've seen with my friends, including driven to suicidal thoughts. I had two friends commit suicide after high school within a few years of each other. Um,
Mhm.
and I wonder if it's better in the mental health field or just for everybody, like the teachings you do on YouTube, which are available to anyone, to follow a path of self-awareness about their original nature, or have that be part of the therapy before jumping to drugs, or maybe it's drugs for a short period of time because it's the anxiety is so acute, it's felt in the body, they're shaking, they're curling up. I mean, it's hard to back your mind out of that when you're that deeply set.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that drugs can be useful to tranquilize the situation temporarily to help you function, so you can
Right.
function, right? But once you're able to function, in the work that I do with people, I start to train them to meditate. I start to get them into a meditation practice every single day. And I start to help them understand what they're practicing is to calm the mind. And if you're going to calm the mind, you have to start paying attention to it. You have to stop realizing that you're not your mind. You're not the voice in your head. Right? And when it's not calm, you have to start learning about ways to calm it. So one of the things I've been doing recently is training people in doing breath work,
Hmm.
because we know that if you change the way you breathe, it will help to calm the mind. And if the mind's calmer, it stops sending the signals to the autonomic nervous system to get the body to be ready to fight or run, right?
Hmm.
So all those different ways of, there's a whole, I started writing a new book, right? And the book is about a pathway to well-being through understanding non-dual reality.
Hmm.
So it's a non-dual approach, and it's part of the way that I work as a non-dual therapist these days, right? And in that book, I'm going to be talking about all the different ways that you can learn that will help you to calm your mind when your mind's agitated or it's suffering or it's fearful or it's angry, so that over time you can gradually retrain your mind to be calmer and more relaxed and more realistic, and stop sending the system the messages to your autonomic nervous system that's going to have the adrenaline come out and all the rest of it. It's a process that takes time, but there are specific things that you can learn to do that will help to calm the mind and relax the body over time. And I've used this with people that were having panic attacks, right? And it works. It
Mm.
works. If
Wonderful.
they do the meditation practice, and if they take the time to get some psychoeducation and learn about their mind, learn about how their nervous system works and everything, so they can become conscious of what's happening, and do the right practices, it's inevitable that it's going to work over time.
Hmm. A lot of these things that we've talked about today and that you just mentioned, the breathing practices, India yoga has tons of them, and of course, Vipassana meditation, other meditations. It's all based in breathing and watching the breath, and so forth. And when a lot of people think about um, enlightenment, altered states of consciousness that are not drug induced, they think about spirituality. you know I want to be spiritual. They join a group, which whatever it is. I mean, the contemplative prayers in Christianity is, it's all of these things are ancient. Do we need quote unquote spirituality to do any of this? Because it seems like everything you've told me today was not couched in spiritual terminology. Like, it's very pragmatic and practical.
Yeah, yeah. I'm becoming more and more anti any religious or spiritual notions, because I think that they contaminate the process. I
Hmm.
don't think it's the truth is the truth. And any, yeah, if you look at Buddhism or Christianity or Sufism, if you look at any of the traditions and you look at the mystical version of them, they're saying exactly the same thing.
Exactly. Right.
Jesus Christ was trying to teach people to be awake. He said, I offer you life everlasting. What's that mean? It means you're not physical, you're spiritual. You're not physical, you're
Right.
consciousness, and that's not physical. That's not going to die, right? So if you look at the things that the Buddha said, they're exactly the same kind of things. And that's all that the Buddha or Muhammad or Jesus Christ, they were teachers. They were teachers.
Right.
So, it's like my Zen teacher up in Ithaca. I was so blessed and fortunate to find this guy, that he's a Zen teacher, but he goes out of his way to say Zen's bullshit and Buddhism is bullshit. And if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him, because That stuff is all in the way. The
Right.
truth is the truth. It lives on its own. People have this famous saying, "The truth shall set you free," right? But what they don't get about it is just knowing about it's not going to set you free. It's just going to piss you off, right?
Right. Right.
Because you won't be able to experience the freedom of it, right? So the only way the truth is going to set you free is you've got to live it. You can't just know about it. And the only way you're going to live it is to know what your true nature is and be able to start to practice experiencing yourself that way in the circumstances that you find yourself in.
Right. So you're talking that it's not knowledge, it's a lived experience, right? And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a lived practice,
yeah.
right? And that's what's at the core of mysticism. Like Sufism is a mystic part of Islam, but these
Mhm.
guys are saying, hey, I can be one with God now or one with consciousness now. I don't need to wait and have, and in the Christian church, you got to go through all this hierarchy of people to reach God. You can't just connect straight. But, Meister Eckhart and Jesus said, hey, the kingdom's within you. That's your consciousness. I think it's
Yeah.
because we tend to, as humans, anthropomorphize God,
Mhm.
as a person with traits, and rather than just the consciousness and awareness that is everything, and
Yeah,
that
that's
leads
part
to
of that's part of the fallen state. The fallen state, right, is to put yourself in a position where you can only believe in God. The
mm,
awakened state, when you have a direct insight into your true nature, is that you know God by being God.
hmm
And a lot of people would say, well, that's sacrilegious. No, it's not sacrilegious, because if you come to understand that the awareness that we are is the source of everything that's appearing, isn't that godlike?
right,
You know,
right.
and they say that God, even when I was in Catholic school when I was a kid, they said God is everywhere. And Paul Hederman, one of my favorite teachers in non-duality, always says, "Well, they told me that when I was in school, but I kept saying, well, how come I never see him if he's everywhere? It seems like he's hiding from me, right?"
Right.
But the reality of it is when you experience your true nature, you understand God is everywhere, because God is you. God is where you go. God is always.
Yeah. When at the end of his life, as you know, Ramana Maharshi was in pain. He had cancer, and people would say, "Doesn't your leg hurt or whatever?" And aren't you worried about it? He said, "How can I be worried? I'm one with me, and the pain are one. It's all part of the same existence,
Yeah.
the same awareness. It's not whatever. I don't know what I'm trying to
He's
get with that, but
he was a very unusual case, because he was not religious. He was
right.
not a Hindu. He was not a Buddhist. He was not a Christian. All he was interested in is the nature of things as they actually are, right? And he was a very unusual case because he was able to live his life outside of the collective socialized reality. He was living in a very pure state of consciousness, and so he could be related to pain in a way that was unaffecting not affecting him, because he was so much the awareness of the pain rather than the experience of the pain.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the awareness is never affected by anything. It just is. And he was living so much in that whatever happened to the body was not really important as far as he was concerned.
Right. Who cares if I die young or if the leg
Yeah,
falls off? It's
yeah,
irrelevant to me.
yeah.
Right.
Now, I don't
Right.
think that most of us are going to be fortunate enough to experience what he did,
Right.
but I think we can expect to be happy regardless of the circumstances, and we can expect to be experience a way of experiencing our life and our body that if we're in pain, we won't have the suffering of being in the pain, even if it's uncomfortable. Because the suffering of being in the pain is the idea that it shouldn't be happening and I don't want it. I'm going to resist it. I'm going to try and control it. That's the suffering, right? So you can be uncomfortable and not suffer.
Right. Right. Let me ask you something related, but a little bit in between the awareness that is always there in us. In a lot of mystical traditions, um, There was a psychologist named Charles Tart. Are you familiar with Charlie Tart's work? Altered
Mhm.
States of Consciousness, his whole life of study. He could never experience any of them himself. I think because he was so locked in his head and his analytic thinking, he couldn't separate himself from it. Some people in these altered states, whether it's through, I'm going to say, a psychological shift, from breath work or meditation, or it's from psychedelics, of any ayahuasca or LSD, um, or from different rituals, they come in contact with, uh, I don't know, spirits, entities that they're claiming are of another realm that they can communicate with and get information from to help inform the practices or overcome things with them or whatever. If we are just consciousness, do these, I mean, I know in Islam and Christianity, there's angels and spirits and devils and all that, but when we just think about the nature of our essence is conscious awareness, and we're here in this kind of Maya illusion, are those things in between that these mystics talk about and these people on these psychedelic trips or in these mystic things experiencing real things, or is it more different layers of illusion in the mind, do you think?
Well, I think they're experiencing real things, and the way they talk about them is a function of their learning and their conditioning.
Mm,
And so they'll talk about them. A Christian will talk about saints and spirits in one way. A Buddhist will talk about it in a different way.
right.
So that's a function of your conditioning. But the when you talk about altered states, right? If you want to really be clear about the nature of altered states, right? Altered states is the state that we're in ordinarily. Your
Right.
personality is an altered state,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. Yes. Clear.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're experiencing your true nature, that's an unaltered state. It's an unconditioned state, right? So you're in an altered state all the time when you're in the mental state, in the personality, and identify with the body. And when you experience things in that state, right, in that altered state that have to do with the natural state, you interpret them based on the altered state and the concepts
Mm,
that you understand. So it
right.
really doesn't matter the words you use. That's why they talk about in non-duality pointing,
Right.
right? So you don't get caught up in the concepts, right? And you understand the pointing is just pointing to something with the idea that if you look for yourself and you see that for yourself, that's where it has power, not by believing what somebody's telling you in terms of what they're pointing at.
Hmm. Bruce Lee, in his final movie, he was giving a story to a student and pointing at the moon, and the kid's looking at his finger, and he smacks him, and he says, "Stop looking at the finger, or you'll miss all the heavenly glory of the moon." You know,
That's right.
the pointers aren't the thing. Don't get caught on those pointers either.
That's
Um,
right. And
uh,
even if you do the practice that Ramana Maharshi gave to people of self-inquiry, right? It's very important to understand that that practice can work and it can be very powerful if, when you turn your attention inward and look to its source, you don't look to get an answer. The
hmm,
mind will try and say things about that. That's not it. When you turn your attention and look at the source, right, you just look and see, and the seeing itself is the answer, right? Because your true nature is non-conceptual. You can't name it. If you name it, that's not it.
it's
But if
like
you
the Tao.
experience it, yeah. But if you experience it and you understand that that's you, right? Then you can become familiar with that and live from there.
Hmm. So this brings me back to my first question, which was about definition. So when you're talking about knowing your awareness as who you are, is that the same as what people call enlightenment or self-realization?
Yeah, it is. I mean, but it's not a big deal. You
Right.
know, if somebody asks me, "Are you enlightened?" Right? That's the kind of thing people will ask a teacher. Are you enlightened? Right?
Sure.
And the answer that I have for that is, if you're enlightened, then I am.
Hmm.
Because if you're enlightened, then do you know who you are? And if you know who you are, then you know who I am, right? So if you're enlightened, then I'm enlightened. If you're not enlightened, then I'm not enlightened.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm just trying to parse out a definition for a question, which is that I think in many minds, including my own at certain points, was that the person who's enlightened is a sage and they're all knowing. But what I'm coming to see is that when you come to know that you are just the conscious state of awareness, it doesn't make you all knowing of everything
Mhm.
necessarily, correct? It just gives you a knowing of yourself to become a better actor in this world that we're in, I think.
Yeah, it gives you access to wisdom.
Hmm.
And wisdom is the fundamental insight into your identity and your true nature. And once you have that fundamental insight, you have the source of wisdom, but the personality is no better off at all. I mean, people, I recall in the past, people would ask the Dalai Lama questions, assuming that he was all knowing because he's
Right.
awake. Ask him questions about psychological questions or psychiatric questions, and his answer would be, I have no idea. I've never studied
Good for him. Yeah.
that.
Good for him.
Yeah, yeah.
When you mention you have, I think the word you said was a connection to wisdom or access to wisdom. You said access to wisdom. Is that the wisdom of because you know who you are, that you have a wisdom of how to act and respond within yourself or for yourself? Or is it a wisdom like, say, the Akashic record, where you have access to the wisdom of all people of all times?
No, it's just access to the wisdom of the truth of your nature.
Yeah.
And when you have access to that, you understand that you are love, and you understand that wisdom means having skillful means.
Mm,
Right. So wisdom means I'm looking at what my mind's telling me is the case and what my mind's telling me to do. And I'm looking to see, is that consistent with my true nature? Is that consistent with an expression of my affinity for everything in my life? If it's not, that's not skillful. Right. So then I look to see what would be skillful means, what would be an
mm,
expression of my true nature. This is one of the reasons why my Zen teacher up in Ithaca has been really making a big deal out of the 8 verses of training the mind. It's one of the Buddhist sutras,
hmm
and he's making a big deal out of it because he says that if you can understand what those 8 verses are pointing to and practice those 8 verses, it will train your mind to stop being a personality and start to express your true nature.
mm,
And the Dalai Lama, every morning he meditates for 2 hours, and every morning he recites the 8 verses for training the mind.
mm.
You
Interesting.
would think you would think that this is a guy who, from being a little child, he was raised in a spiritual world. He was raised as a spiritual leader. He has deep understandings of all the spiritual scriptures, right? You would think at this point he wouldn't need to read the 8 verses of training the mind every morning,
Right.
but it's because he's wise enough to know that the mind will regroup. This
Mm,
is why I keep telling meditation practitioners, you do not have a meditation practice unless you're practicing every day like brushing your teeth.
right.
If that's not the case, you do not have a meditation practice, because if you miss one day, your personality will completely regroup. Paul Hederman was over in Asia doing one of these very intense meditation retreats in the dark, for weeks at a time with very little food and so forth. And he said that because he was trying to achieve the idea of having a consistent experience of his true nature, right? So after 2 weeks, he said he was in a pretty pure state of mind, right? But on the way back to the airport in the cab, his personality completely regrouped and he was right back in his head again.
Yeah. I always think it's so easy to become enlightened in a cave, but you leave the cave and stub your toe and you're right back where you started, or someone
That's
cuts you
right.
off in traffic, right?
That's
Uh,
right. That's
you,
right. Unless you're
that's
going to
why,
spend your whole life in the cave, you're better off practicing amongst other people.
yeah. And I think that's your main thrust with your teaching is this kind of enlightenment in real life, and for real life, so to speak.
Yeah. And to
Um,
have your life be your practice. Your life
mhm,
is your practice. Yeah.
yeah. What about pain syndromes? Is being aware of your true nature help you separate away from pain?
Well, it's kind of like you can stop suffering from the pain,
Mm,
And then because you can stop suffering from the pain, you're not resisting it, and you're able to relax more. And the more you relax, the less the pain is, right?
right.
So when you're open and when you're in touch with your true nature, you're free to look at the pain and merge with the pain and stop conceptualizing about the pain and experience it just as a sensation, not as something that's negative, not as something that you want to stop or try and control.
Right.
Whatever you let be will let you be.
Hmm. Yeah. That's what that which we fight against gets bigger, that we push against, right?
Yeah, and whatever
So,
you resist will persist,
yeah.
right? And it's interesting because why is it true that whatever you resist will persist? And the reason it'll persist is because you need it to be there to resist it. So
Yes.
you're actually causing it to stay there by resisting it.
Right. Uh, Before we go, so I don't hold you up for your whole day, um, I'd like to, if there's a piece of wisdom or something to share that we haven't touched on with your teachings that is important or vital for our listeners, I would love you to share that now.
Well, I also have a couple of books out there.
Okay.
One's called Enlightenment Made Easy.
Hmm.
And then there's another book. My last book is called Dying to Live. Right. So, in both of those books, there'll be more opportunities to see things. But the most important thing that I would say to people is allow yourself to pay attention to the activity of your mind and notice the suffering that it's producing. And if you do that with the understanding that suffering is not necessary, it's possible not to suffer, that will give you the motivation to begin to take action, to begin to learn to meditate, to start to pay attention to these non-dual teachings, right? So that you can start to develop a way of dealing with your mental states and your emotions that will allow you to start to behave in ways that are more consistent with living in a harmonious way with other people, right? Especially in relationship to your immediate family, right? Most people's suffering comes from the
Yeah, family.
conflict in their immediate family, with your parents, with your children, with your partner, right?
Hmm.
So those are the areas, because in these teachings, what you come to learn through insight and through practice is that every time you experience something negative, there's a negative circumstance. Instead of that being the source of suffering, you begin to see that it's your teacher. It's teaching you to pay attention to the suffering that's occurring with an understanding that it's possible not to suffer. And so you begin to look at everything that's happening. This is what the 8 verses of training the mind say. Take the people who are behaving in ways that are abusive to you and harmful to you, and instead of getting into a reaction about that, uh, see them as your teacher. See them as valuable because they're helping you to see the function of your own mind.
Dr. David Parrish, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us. It's been a really great conversation, very deep and insightful. I really enjoyed it. I picked the questions. So, uh, and I know the listeners will enjoy it as well. We're going to put your links to your books and your website and your YouTube channel below in the show notes. And I will suggest that everyone check them out. Um,
And I
um,
want to thank you, Mark, because
yeah.
I usually don't do this. In fact, I've turned it down before with other
Mhm.
people. But for some reason, I had a sense that this would be helpful to some people. I don't like the idea of publicizing myself or giving people, I'm not selling anything. Everything I do is for free. So I kind of avoid that because I don't like the idea of presenting the image that I'm trying to get more attention. I'm not trying to get more attention. And when I first started doing the YouTube channel, the only reason I was doing it was I was teaching a meditation class, and I thought if some students can't make it to the class, they could listen to the talk on YouTube.
Yeah.
And then I turned around and noticed there was 19,000 subscribers. So I figured, oh, well, there must be an interest in these talks. And so I started to make sure I put them up every week.
We can tell. Thank you. I really appreciate
Okay.
it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.